Go back to the darkness where you belong. Never! This power is mine! Your darkness ends here. You cannot banish me.
No one in the village knew how Ugegbe came to live in the village of Amanko. All they knew was that she was a very beautiful woman in her early 20s with no family, and she lived in a hut not far from the market square. Ugegbe was the dream of every man and the envy of all the women in the village. She swayed her waist as she walked, her curvy shape and voluminous bust like the perfect artwork of the gods. Her waist beads jingled as if singing her praises. Her dark skin glittered in the sun like it had just been polished with the shiniest tyro. While the other young women of Amanko adorned themselves beautifully, some in George wrappers with intricate lace blouses, others in vibrant ankara with matching geli, and the wealthiest in delicate akwit cloth, all with coral beads cascading down their necks, Ugegbe's appearance was altogether different. Her Isa egu cloth clung to her body in ways that defied explanation, the lion head pattern seeming to move across the fabric as she walked. Her wrapper was shorter than was proper, revealing legs that seemed to go on forever. The coral beads around her neck were darker, richer, almost blood red in certain light. Her geli was always tied in an intricate style no other woman could replicate, with a single feather that some swore came from no bird they had ever seen. The first to fall was Okafor, the palm wine tapper. He was a married man with 3 children, known throughout Amanko for his devotion to his wife, Adis. But one market day, he saw Ugegbe selecting yams at Momankechi's stall. The way her fingers traced the skin of the tubers, the way her lips curved as she smiled at him, Okafor was lost. "I must have her," he told his friend Emeka that evening, palm wine spilling from his trembling hands. "Okafor, are you mad?" Emeka responded, glancing nervously around the compound. "You have a wife. Children. What about Adis?" But Okafor's eyes had taken on a glazed, distant look. "Adis is a good woman. But Ugegbe is different. She is like moonlight on water, like the first rain after the dry season." Within a week, Okafor had abandoned his family. He was found 3 days later at the edge of the Ogba forest, babbling nonsense about a house made of shadows and a woman with eyes like burning coals. His hair had turned completely white, though he was only 32 years old. He never spoke a coherent word again. The village elders gathered under the great oak tree to discuss this troubling matter. "This woman is not natural," declared Ichi Okonkwo, the oldest of the elders, his voice crackling like dry leaves. "I have lived through 87 rainy seasons, and I know evil when I see it." "But what can we do?" asked Ichinamdi. "She has committed no crime that we can prove. We cannot banish someone simply for being beautiful." "Beautiful," spat Ichi Okonkwo. "A python is beautiful too, but you do not invite it into your home." Yet despite the elders' warnings, the men of Amanko continued to fall under Ugegbe's spell. Chinidu, the blacksmith's son, was next. Then Obina, who had been preparing for his traditional marriage to the daughter of a wealthy merchant in the neighboring village. Each man became obsessed, abandoning their duties, their families, their very senses. And each met a terrible fate. The women of Amanko began to whisper among themselves. In the market square, as they ground their cassava or sorted their bitter leaf, they spoke in hushed tones. "My sister's husband has begun to ask about her," said Ifioma, clutching her baby tighter to her chest. "He has that look in his eyes." "We must do something," Neka agreed, her beautiful George wrapper and coral beads seeming suddenly inadequate, ordinary. "The men will not listen, so we must act." Among the women was Edeora, the daughter of a powerful Dibia, a medicine man. Unlike the other young women who wore their traditional attire with simple elegance, Adora's akwit wrapper was blessed with protective charms woven into its very threads. Her coral beads had been purified in sacred streams. She was 20 years old, beautiful in her own right, with intelligence that shone in her eyes like lamplight. "I will seek my father's counsel," Edora told the gathering of women. If Ugegbe is what we suspect, there are ways to know for certain. That night, Adeora's father, Dibia performed a divination. He cast his cowrie shells, burned sacred herbs, and called upon the ancestors. When he finally opened his eyes, his face was grave. She is no woman, he told his daughter. She is an Ogbanj, a malevolent spirit that has taken beautiful form. But she is unlike any Ogbanj I have encountered in all my years. She feeds on the life force of men, drawing them to her like moths to flame, and when they are consumed, she moves on, leaving behind only empty shells. How do we stop her, father? Dibia was silent for a long moment, staring into the flames of his ritual fire. There is only one way. We must find her Tiwa, the object that tethers her to this world. If we destroy it, she will be forced to return to the spirit realm. But where would such an object be hidden? That, said her father, is what you must discover. And it will be dangerous, my daughter. She will know if someone seeks her secret. Adeora knew what she had to do, though the thought terrified her. She would have to get close to Ugegbe, close enough to discover her secret, while protecting herself from the spirit's dark influence. The next morning, Adeora dressed in her finest wrapper, a stunning piece of handwoven oquit cloth in deep indigo and white patterns that told stories of her lineage. She wrapped her coral beads around her neck, 7 strands, each one blessed by her father with protective incantations. She tied her red gelly with careful precision, tucking a small pouch of protective herbs within its folds. She found Ugegbe by the stream, washing clothes. Up close, Ugegbe's beauty was almost painful to behold. Her dark skin seemed to emanate its own light, and her Isa Igurapa, though wet at the hem, clung to her curves in ways that seemed to defy nature itself. Her waist beads, not the simple strands worn by other women, but elaborate layers of coral, glass, and stones that no one could name, chimed with every movement. Ugegbe, Adeora called out, keeping her voice steady. I am Adeora. I have come to welcome you properly to our village. Forgive us for our coldness. Ugegbe turned, and her smile was like honey laced with poison. How kind of you, Adeora. I confess, I have been lonely. The other women do not seem to like me. They are afraid, Adeora said honestly. Strange things have happened since you arrived. Strange things happen everywhere, Ugegbe replied, wringing out a cloth. Surely you do not blame me for the foolishness of men. Over the following days, Adeora carefully cultivated a friendship with Ugegbe. She visited her hut, bringing food and companionship. All the while, she observed, searching for any clue to the location of the Tiwa. Ugegbe's hut was both ordinary and extraordinary. From the outside, it appeared to be a simple structure like any other in the village. But inside, there was something unsettling about the way shadows fell, the way sounds seemed muffled. There were no personal belongings, no signs of a life lived, only the bare essentials, and a locked wooden chest in the corner. What do you keep in there? Adeora asked one day, trying to sound casual. Ugegbe's eyes flashed, just for a moment. Only old clothes and trinkets. Nothing of interest. But Adeora knew she had found what she was looking for. That night, she reported to her father and the council of women. The chest, she told them. Her Tiwa must be in that chest. But it is locked, and she is always there, always watching. Then we must create a distraction, said Neka. Something that would draw her away. They formulated a plan. The next market day, they would stage an emergency, a child lost in the forest, perhaps, or a fire that needed all hands to extinguish. In the chaos, Adeora would have her chance. But Ugegbe was no ordinary spirit, and she was not easily fooled. On the appointed day, as the village erupted in orchestrated panic over a lost child, Ugegbe stood perfectly still in the market square. Her eyes found Adeora's, and in that moment, Adeora knew that she had been discovered. Looking for something, friend? Ugegbe's voice was soft, but it carried an edge like a freshly sharpened blade. The air around them seemed to thicken. The other villagers, caught up in their false emergency, did not notice as the two women faced each other. Adora's hand moved to her coral beads, clutching them like a lifeline. "I know what you are," Adora said, her voice steady despite her pounding heart. Ugegbe laughed, and it was a sound like breaking glass. "Do you? And what am I, clever daughter of the Dibia? You are Ogbanj. You are death wearing a beautiful mask." "How poetic," Ugegbe purred. Her form seemed to shimmer, her beauty intensifying until it was almost unbearable to look at her. The Egu patterns on her wrapper began to move, the lion head snarling silently. "But you are only half right. I am Ogbanj, yes. But I am also so much more. I am every man's desire, every woman's fear. I am the price of vanity, of lust, of the weakness that makes men abandon honor for a fleeting touch." "You are a monster." "I am a teacher," Ugegbe corrected. "And your village has learned nothing." With a gesture, Ugegbe sent a wave of force that knocked Adora backward. The young woman's protective beads glowed warm against her skin, absorbing the worst of the attack, but she could feel the malevolent power pressing against her father's charms. The commotion finally drew the attention of the other villagers. They turned to see Adora on the ground and Ugegbe standing over her, no longer bothering to hide her true nature. Her eyes had taken on an otherworldly gleam, and the air around her rippled with dark energy. "Stay back!" Dibia is shouted, pushing through the crowd. He held his staff before him, carved with protective symbols that began to glow with their own light. "I bind you, spirit. I command you in the name of the ancestors, in the name of Chokwu Almighty, to leave this place." Ugegbe's laughter rang out across the market square. "Your charms are strong, old man. But they are not strong enough." She raised her hand, and several men in the crowd surged forward, their eyes glazed, their faces slack. These were men who had fallen under her spell but had not yet met their doom, and now they moved to protect her like mindless servants. "Father!" Adora cried out, scrambling to her feet. But Dibia was already chanting, his voice rising in the ancient words of power. The protective symbols on his staff blazed brighter, and a circle of light expanded outward, pushing back against Ugegbe's dark influence. The enchanted men stumbled, confusion crossing their faces as the spell over them wavered. Ugegbe hissed, her beautiful face contorting with rage. For just a moment, her true form showed through, something ancient and terrible, with eyes like pits and a mouth full of too many teeth. In that moment of distraction, while Dibia held her at bay, Adora ran. She ran toward Ugegbe's hut, her wrapper flying behind her, her coral beads bouncing against her chest. She could hear Ugegbe's shriek of fury behind her, could feel the malevolent attention turning her way like a predator spotting its prey. She burst into the hut and threw herself at the wooden chest. It was locked, but Adora had come prepared. She pulled a small iron hammer from her wrapper, iron, the metal that spirits feared, and brought it down on the lock with all her strength. The lock shattered on the second blow. Inside the chest, nestled among dark cloths, was a small clay pot sealed with wax. Adora could feel the power emanating from it, dark and pulsing like a rotten heartbeat. This was the Tiyua, the object that bound Ugegbe to the mortal world. She heard footsteps behind her, impossibly fast, impossibly light. "Put that down," Ugegbe's voice was no longer beautiful. It was the sound of wind through dead trees, of things rotting in dark places. Adora turned to see Ugegbe standing in the doorway. Her Egu wrapper now seemed to be made of shadows, the lion heads alive and snarling. Her waist beads had become chains of bone and something that looked like dried blood. Her beauty remained, but it was the beauty of a corpse flower, of something designed to lure prey to their death. I said, "Put it down." Instead, Adora raised the clay pot high. "Return to the spirit world, Ogbanj. Your time here is done." If you break that, Ugegbe said, and now there was something like desperation in her voice, you have no idea what you will unleash. I know exactly what I will unleash. The truth. The end of your evil. Edeora brought the pot down on the hard dirt floor with all her might. The pot shattered into 1,000 pieces, and from within it poured smoke, thick, black, and reeking of decay. But as the smoke cleared, there was something else, a small, withered object that might have once been a human heart. Ugegbe screamed, and it was a sound that made the walls of the hut tremble. Her form began to dissolve, the beautiful shell cracking and falling away like a broken mask. Beneath was something that had never been human, something ancient and hungry and full of malice. You think you have won, the thing that had been, Ugegbe shrieked. I am eternal. I will return. There will always be men who cannot resist temptation, and I will feed on them until the end of time. Perhaps, Edeora said, clutching her coral beads. But not here. Not now. Not in Amanko. The spirit's form continued to disintegrate, pulled back toward whatever realm had spawned it. Its final words echoed through the hut, beware, daughter of the Dibia. Beware the beauty that has no soul. I am not the only one. We are legion, and we will always find those who invite us in. And then, with a final shriek that rattled the very earth, Ugegbe was gone. Edeora stood in the empty hut, her hands shaking, her wrapper torn and stained. She picked up the withered hard thing from among the pottery shards. This, her father would need to dispose of properly, with the right rituals to ensure it could never be used to anchor such a spirit again. Outside, the village was in chaos. The men who had been under Ugegbe's spell were waking as if from a nightmare, confused and ashamed. Dibia stood in the center of the market square, his staff still glowing faintly, a protective barrier around the gathered villagers. When Edeora emerged from the hut, holding the tiwa, a great cheer went up from the women of Amanko. They surrounded her, their wrappers bright in the afternoon sun, some in George, others in Ankara, a few in precious Akwit cloth, their coral beads clicking together like celebratory drums. But Edeora did not feel like celebrating. She thought of Ugegbe's final words, of the warning. The spirit had spoken truth, there would always be others like her, and there would always be those foolish enough to fall under their spell. That night, as the village held a cleansing ceremony to purify the land and the men who had been touched by evil, Edeora sat with her father by his ritual fire. You did well, my daughter, Dibia said. You saved this village. But for how long? Edeora asked. She said there were others. That they were legion. This is true, her father acknowledged. Evil is not so easily vanquished from the world. But that is why we must be vigilant. That is why we must teach each generation about the dangers that lurk in beautiful masks. Your children will tell this story, and their children after them, so that the people will remember, not all that glitters is gold, and not all beauty is benign. In the years that followed, the story of Ugegbe became a cautionary tale told throughout the land. Mothers warned their sons about women of impossible beauty who appeared from nowhere. Fathers taught their children to value character over appearance. And young women wore their traditional wrappers, whether George, Ankara, Akwit, or Isaegu, and coral beads with pride, knowing that true beauty came from within, from strength and courage and honor. As for Edeora, she became a great Dibia in her own right, protecting the village from spiritual threats and teaching others to recognize the signs of evil wearing a pleasant face. She never forgot Ugegbe's final warning, and she remained vigilant all her days. Because she knew that somewhere, in some village, in some form, the Ogbanj would return. They always did. But as long as there were those brave enough to stand against them, as long as there were those who could see past the beautiful mouth to the monster beneath, the people would endure. And in the village of Amanko, whenever a stranger of unusual beauty appeared, the people remembered. They remembered Okafor, who lost his mind. They remembered Chinidu and Obina and all the others who had fallen. They remembered Ugegbe, the downfall of men. and they remained vigilant. The elder finished his tale and set down his palm wine. The young men gathered around the fire sat in silence, contemplating the story they had heard. In the distance, the village drums beat out their nightly rhythm, a sound as old as the earth itself. "Remember this tale," the elder said, his voice grave. "For the Ugegbe still walks among us, in many forms and many faces. Guard your hearts, guard your minds, and never forget, the most dangerous evil is often the one that comes wrapped in beauty." And the young men nodded, understanding at last why their fathers had told them this story, and why they, in turn, would tell it to their own sons one day.